Welcome back. Lawmakers in London now having their say on the UK's exit from the European Union. The House of Commons weighing in today on Prime Minister Theresa May's bill activating the British exit. Attempts so far to amend the wording of that draft have all failed. Joining us right now to weigh in on that, Eurasia Group President Ian Bremmer. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
So is May still on track to meet the deadline to trigger Article 50, which is the beginning of the exit?
Yes, that's right. End of March was what she had been saying for months now. The Supreme Court ruling had the possibility of delaying that. That wasn't the case. They're going to be able to pass this legislation, I think, in relatively short order. Of course, a majority of parliamentarians in the UK didn't actually want to see Brexit, but now that the people have spoken, it's pretty overwhelming majority that are getting on board with what May wants.
All right, implications.
Well, implications are you're going to trigger it, but still you're a minimum of 2 years away, and most people believe considerably longer than that they're going to need an extension. And so the market implications are still pretty far off when we talk about, financial jobs, companies moving away, potential for FDI, especially because Europe itself is so uncertain. I mean, for all of the problems, and there are real disruptions with a messy negotiation of a hard Brexit, if it turns out that Europe itself is falling apart, then, a lot of the Brexiteers, for good or for bad, are going to look like they were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
What about the implications for the continent and the fear on the far right, particularly in France? If they come to power, what happens with the currency as a whole? Like, does the euro go away?
So the interesting thing, nobody in the markets wants Le Pen to win because they believe that that would have significant further negative implications for the euro, for the European economies as a whole. She's saying that she would want the French to be out. But let's be clear, she wouldn't have anywhere close to the votes in their Congress to make that happen. And so as a consequence, yeah, you'd get a lot less resilience on the part of the Europeans to respond to crises as they occur. So the Greeks need an actual debt haircut. There ain't no way that's going to happen with Le Pen in power, right? And anything else that comes is going to be more difficult. And, of course, every domino that falls, it's an additional stimulus for other populist parties across the continent. But the idea that Le Pen equates to Frexit, I think there is a chance that Le Pen wins.
Right? Frexit meaning France is next to get out of the euro.
Go for it. Everybody just
go.
Wow. Yeah, but I mean, is it fair to say at this point that the euro has already been a failure?
I think it's fair to say that the European Union has been a failure, in the sense that what they were trying to do is get all of these countries to join, and they said that the integration is going to bring them closer politically over time. They're going to look more alike. They're going to support a creation of a European supranational identity. Now, it's very clear that Turkey today, a candidate member, looks less like the West than it did 10 years ago. It's clear that's true of Hungary, that's true of Slovakia, that's true of Romania, and it might well be true very short order in France too. So, I mean, what you were trying to do originally was not just a common market, it wasn't just a common currency, but it was also create a supranational political identity to make sure these countries didn't go to war against each other anymore. Well, that alliance is proving to have been far more ambitious than you could actually operationalize on the ground. And the people are reacting very badly to that idea.
Yeah, it seems like this blending the very diverse European cultures together and asking them to join as one was unrealistic from the start, because each of these countries have their own identity, their own political system.
And their financial mentality. One's massive debt, one's massive spenders.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and the banks certainly were willing to take advantage of that for as long as they could, but the reality was you never created fiscal harmonization in these countries because the Greeks and the Germans were two fundamentally different types of economies.
Before we move on, I've got to ask you about Russia. There are reports, some speculation that President Trump could try to lift the sanctions against Russia. Your take on that?
I think it's very clear that Trump intends a serious rapprochement between the U.S. and Russia, which would include sanctions rollback. He hasn't said that explicitly yet, but everything he's done is moving in that direction. Now, let's be clear. Obama's relationship with Russia was probably his biggest foreign policy failure, and generally speaking, there have been quite a few of them on his administration. Secondly, Trump and Putin are both kind of fashioning themselves strong men leaders who don't want American exceptionalism, want more transactional relationships. There are lots of reasons why he'd want to put points on the board, but there are also lots of questions around the intelligence agencies in the U.S., around many of Trump's advisors being on payroll with folks around the Kremlin, and that's one of the reasons why a few very loud Republicans in Senate, like McCain, Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, are really hitting him on this. I think this is an area that it's going to be, you can build a U.S.-Russia relationship that's better. It's hard to build one that is sustainably better.
Now, if you look at just Trump versus Romney, Romney was saying was their biggest threat. Now Trump's trying to totally different approach. So, of course, people are still kind of shocked by it.
Yeah, and of course, the Fox interview right before the Super Bowl where O'Reilly said he's a killer. And, you know, Trump is like, well, okay, but, you know, so's a lot of people, right? And
what about us?
That's unusual, right? That's not...
That was highly criticized, yeah.
That was highly criticized, and it's because Trump... Every time Trump is hit on Russia, he wants to focus on something else. He wants to say, no, no, China's the real threat. Iran's the real threat. And it is true that China and Iran are problematic for American security in a host of areas. But there's something the American people don't get.
Yeah.
They don't really care about Russia, but they don't get it.
Something's got to give, because if they are going to have a better relationship, at some point Putin is going to say, okay, roll back these sanctions.
Yeah. Look, I think, though, that what we're seeing now is this president is focusing on American interests first, not being the global citizen taking care of other countries, but just taking care of ours. And so I would expect him to continue to enter into transactional relationships with other nations in terms of just American interest. Wouldn't you think that that's where we're going with Russia? It's focusing on what's good for us here, not necessarily, you know, anything else outside of the American interest.
Well, that's the question. Is there are a lot of people, I don't think that McCain, when he's criticizing Russia, thinks of himself as being unpatriotic. He would say, wait a second, these guys were involved in hacking the United States, and we didn't really do anything. He criticized Obama sharply for not doing anything, right? He was the president at the time, not Trump. But the idea that Trump isn't taking many of the conservatives in the foreign policy establishment believes that Obama was actually too weak on Russia. And they have no problem with Trump taking a whack at the Chinese on trade, on cyber, on security. But they look at Trump's take on Russia and they say, wait a second, Putin is not supporting American interests. Putin doesn't want a strong United States. Why is Trump consistently trying to find a way to cozy up to this guy? Is there something that we don't know? Yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that on Russia, America first seems consistent in the way Trump talks about a lot of foreign policy around the world, but on Russia, somehow it doesn't add up, and people want to get that.
It's true. All right, Ian, great to see you.
Sure, you too.
Thanks so much for the great analysis. Ian Bremmer. By the way, the polls are showing Le Pen losing France, at losing the election, as you just said.
Round, yeah.
Heidi Moore, one of our viewers, just tweeted out, U.S. polls showed Trump losing the U.S. election, too. Don't get too cozy,
Don't get too cozy.
There you go.